They called her the woman who outwitted the Nazis. But her name was Virginia Hall. Born in Baltimore, USA, she was never supposed to become a spy. She was an ordinary woman with extraordinary courage. Yet when World War II erupted and Europe fell into darkness under the Nazi flag, she became one of the most dangerous enemies of Hitler's empire. Virginia's story began not on the battlefield, but with heartbreak. She once dreamed of being a diplomat, but after a tragic hunting accident in her 20s, she lost her left leg, replaced by a wooden one she named Cuth. Most people would have given up on a life of adventure, but not Virginia. She learned to walk again, and she learned to fight back. When Germany invaded France in 1940, the world watched in fear. But Virginia, working in Paris as a clerk, refused to flee. She watched innocent people dragged into trucks, resistance fighters executed in the streets, and families torn apart. Something inside her broke, and that was the moment she made her decision. She would never stay silent again. So she fled to London, and there she found her true calling. The British Special Operations Executive, known as the SOE, was recruiting secret agents to spy behind enemy lines. When they asked what she could do, she simply said, "Anything you need me to do, to stop them." It was dangerous beyond measure. Female spies rarely survived long. Torture, capture, and execution were constant threats. But Virginia didn't hesitate. She was trained in disguise, radio transmission, sabotage, and secret codes. And soon she was dropped into Nazi-occupied France, alone, armed with nothing but a radio and her courage. She posed as a reporter for an American newspaper, a cover that allowed her to travel freely. But beneath that smile, she built an entire resistance network. She helped downed Allied pilots escape through secret mountain routes. She organized safe houses, coordinated sabotage missions, and passed coded messages to London that would change the course of battles. The Gestapo had no idea who she was, but they knew she existed. They called her the Limping Lady, and they feared her more than any man in France. Her messages predicted German troop movements so accurately that Nazi officers began suspecting their own men of betrayal. One Nazi commander posted her photo across France with the warning, "The most dangerous of all Allied spies. We must find and destroy her." But Virginia always stayed one step ahead. She changed her hair color, forged documents, and even pretended to be a milkmaid. She learned the local dialect and worked with farmers and priests to move information and weapons right under the Nazis' noses. While others were running from war, Virginia ran straight into it and became a legend the world would never forget. And yet, her most dangerous mission was still to come, because soon the Gestapo would close in, and Virginia Hall would have to make a choice between capture or a daring escape that seemed impossible.
By 1942, Virginia Hall had become a ghost. Unseen, unheard, yet everywhere. Her secret network spanned across towns, villages, and forests. She worked with resistance fighters, smugglers, priests, and even German defectors. Every message she sent through her radio could mean life or death, for herself and for countless others. She knew the Gestapo was hunting her. Every day their patrols got closer. They raided homes, tortured prisoners, and posted rewards for her capture. Still, Virginia refused to leave. She couldn't, not while her people still needed her. Her code name was Germaine. Under that name, she helped orchestrate one of the most successful resistance networks in France. She coordinated weapons drops for the Maquis fighters, guerrilla warriors hiding in the mountains. She planned the destruction of Nazi supply lines and railways. And every night, she sent London the precious information that Allied forces desperately needed. But one evening, something went terribly wrong. Her radio crackled with an urgent warning from London. "Your cover is blown. The Gestapo is closing in." Virginia froze. She had always known this moment would come, but she didn't panic. Instead, she calmly burned every document, destroyed her codes, and dismantled her radio. Then she vanished into the night. Disguised as an old woman, Virginia took a train south toward the Pyrenees, the massive mountain range that separated France and Spain. It was her only escape route, but it was also one of the most dangerous. The mountains were covered in snow, and Nazi patrols guarded every pass. Still, she walked, with her wooden leg, Cuthbert, stabbing into the frozen ground with every step. For days, she climbed through icy winds, surviving on almost nothing. At one point, she slipped and nearly fell to her death. But she didn't stop. After crossing into Spain, half-frozen, bleeding, and exhausted, she collapsed in a barn. When the locals found her, she was barely alive. Yet when the British agents rescued her weeks later, she only said one thing: "I'm ready to go back." The officers stared in disbelief. She had just escaped one of the most wanted lists in Nazi Europe, and she wanted to return? Yes, because to Virginia, the mission wasn't over. The war was still raging, France was still under occupation, and she knew her skills could turn the tide once again. Back in London, the SOE awarded her the Distinguished Service Cross, one of the Americans' highest honors. But Virginia didn't care for medals. While others celebrated her escape, she began training for her next mission. This time, she wouldn't just gather intelligence, she would help liberate France. When the Allies planned to invade Normandy in 1944, Virginia joined the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, America's top spy agency. They needed someone who knew France, who could blend in, who could lead. There was only one name they trusted: Virginia Hall. And soon she would return to the land she had risked everything to save. But this time, her mission would change history forever.
They say war destroys everything it touches, but even in the darkest ruins, there were hands trying to heal. Hands that trembled, but never stopped working. The nurses, the silent angels of World War II. When soldiers screamed in pain, it was women who answered, not with weapons, but with mercy. They carried stretchers through burning fields, stitched wounds under candlelight, and wiped blood from faces that reminded them of their own brothers. In Normandy, Lieutenant Frances Slanger, a U.S. Army nurse, wrote a letter to the soldiers she cared for. She said, "We have seen you at your worst, dirty, frightened, and in pain, but we love you all the same." One day after writing those words, she was killed by enemy fire. She died doing what she loved, helping others live. In the Pacific, nurses faced endless days of blood and fever, malaria, burns, broken bones. The hospitals were nothing but tents, the air thick with smoke and screams. Yet every sunrise, they stood again, ready to save whoever was left. They patched together bodies torn by war and hearts torn by grief. In Europe, many Red Cross nurses were captured and sent to camps. They hid their identities, pretended to be prisoners, and still secretly treated the sick. Some were discovered and executed, but even in their final moments, they refused to reveal where their medicines were hidden. That was their battlefield, not with bullets, but with bandages. Not for victory, but for humanity. One nurse in Italy once said, "We were not heroes. We were just women who couldn't look away." They didn't make headlines. They didn't receive parades. But when the guns fell silent and the world tried to heal, it was these women who taught it how. They were the heartbeat of compassion in a time when hearts were breaking. And though the war ended, Their courage still whispers through every soldier's story, because behind every man who survived, there was a woman who refused to let him die. When we speak of war, we remember soldiers and guns. But there were others, those who fought with empty hands and full hearts. They didn't march in uniforms, they didn't fire bullets, but they bore the weight of war in silence. The mothers, the messengers, and the unseen heroes who carried hope through despair. In every broken home across Europe, a mother's war had begun. Not on the battlefield, but in the kitchen, the shelter, the field. When bombs fell, they gathered their children under blankets, whispering prayers that tomorrow might still exist. They waited by shattered windows, clutching letters that never came. For them, every knock at the door could mean death or deliverance. There was a woman in Poland, her name lost to history, who hid 12 Jewish children in her basement for 3 years. When Nazi soldiers came searching, she told them the cries they heard were stray cats. She risked everything, every single day. After the war, one of those children said, "I do not remember her face, but I remember her voice. It was the sound of safety." In France, women became the lifeline of the resistance. They disguised themselves as farmers, nurses, even cleaners, carrying secret messages hidden inside loaves of bread, baskets of vegetables, or the lining of their coats. One wrong step, one suspicious glance, and they would vanish forever. But still they walked. Through snow, through fear, through occupied towns crawling with enemy patrols, because freedom needed footsteps, not fame. There was Marie Madeleine Fourcade, leader of one of France's largest spy networks, the only woman to ever head such an operation. She was elegant, calm, and utterly fearless. She carried fake IDs under her dress and maps drawn in invisible ink. Captured twice by the Gestapo, she escaped both times, once by squeezing through the bars of her cell. When asked later how she found the courage, she said, "You learn quickly that fear helps no one. Courage is contagious." Then there were the countless women who became messengers of life, the ones who delivered food, medicine, and hope to those trapped in the crossfire. In villages across Europe, women on bicycles carried bread for the hungry, medicine for the sick, and letters for the lost. Every ride was a gamble, the roads filled with soldiers and suspicion. Yet they rode anyway, whispering prayers with every turn of the wheel. And the mothers. The mothers carried a burden no battlefield could hold. They sent their sons to war knowing they might never return. They wrote letters every night, sealing them with tears. They searched for names and lists of the dead, and still woke up every morning to feed whoever was left. In the ruins of Berlin, one woman was seen planting flowers in the middle of the rubble.
When asked why, she said, "Because if something can grow here, maybe hope can too." War took everything from them, homes, families, peace, but it could not take their will to care, to believe, to rebuild. They were the soul of survival, proof that even when humanity burns, compassion can still bloom in its ashes. They fought hunger, fear, and grief. They carried messages across borders and love across generations. They were the quiet bridge between destruction and tomorrow. And when the world finally fell silent, they were the ones who picked up the pieces. Because while men fought to win the war, it was women who fought to keep humanity alive.